Hi and welcome back to Tech with Mark. In this episode we're going to continue our exploration of Swift. Now I know it can be a pain when you have to learn the basics before you can get started on all the fun stuff, but stick with it. Just a few more videos and then we'll get started on actually making something practical. So I mentioned in the last video on variables, you can define the type of a variable when it's declared. So for example, let my variable int equals 456. Now some of the time for built-in types, Swift doesn't need this as it will be able to work it out. So some of the common types you will see are as follows. In this case, I'm defining my int variable 123, a float variable, that's a floating point number, as 100.3456, a string variable equals a string which you define with quotes at either end, welcome to TechMark, and a Boolean variable which can be either true or false. One thing to notice here are the comments after the declaration. If you type 2 forward slashes, that's the key next to the right-hand shift on your keyboard, then everything after is treated as a comment. It stays with the code so you can read it, but it's ignored by the compiler. Now, one thing to be aware of, if you do something like this, and you're expecting my sum to equals 3 plus 2, the plus 2 is ignored because it's treated as part of the comment. Just something to be aware of. Now sometimes, however, it does make sense to be able to actively select the type you want rather than to let Swift decide for you. Take for example, you want a variable to hold someone's age. Now if you declare it like this, let my age equals 21, which, let's be honest, is wishful thinking, then Swift will actually decide to create that variable as an int, an integer. The problem is that the int type can also be a negative number, which doesn't make sense for an age. So instead, you can optionally decide to make it a different type of number. In our case, we're going to choose a uint8. A uint8 stands for an unsigned integer of length 8. Not 8 numbers in this case, but 8 bits. That means that an age can be anywhere between 0 and 256, which is what we want. There's a couple of other things we should note about Swift and types. First of all, Swift is a type-safe language. Now that means you cannot mix two types together without explicitly telling Swift how to handle it. So let's take this as an example. I'll just get rid of everything else on the screen. So here we have two different variables. The first one, my first value, is 10. Swift is going to interpret that as an int. The second value is 10.5. It's going to treat that as a floating point. So it's either going to treat it as a float or a double. But if you attempt to add those two together, my first value plus my second value, and you click the play button, you'll actually be told that plus cannot be applied to different types, int and double in this case. So in order to get a result, you need to change one value to be the same type as the other, and you can do that like this. We can either decide to make my first value a double like the second value, or we can choose to make my second value an int like the first value. So if we wanted to make the second value an int, we define the type and then we place the second variable inside a bracket. And now you'll see the result we got is 20. So we've lost the precision of the 0.5. Maybe that's what you want. If however you wanted to keep the precision of that floating point, then what we can do instead is we can put the first value inside the double bracket. When we click play now, you'll see that my result has actually been defined as 20.5. You can also do this for strings. So I've defined string value. So currently it's a string of 456, and I'm saying I want to make an int value of that string. And you see that 456 as a string value is actually still a string, but int value is now the integer of 456. Now you do have to be careful, as not everything can be cast to everything else. The second thing is you can declare multiple variables at the same time. If you remember from the first video, I mentioned that if you declare a var variable, you don't have to give it a value at the same time. This means you can declare multiple var variables of the same type at the same time. So for example, I can create 3 variables, red, green, and blue, and make them all ints. And Swift is perfectly happy to accept that, as long, if you remember from that first video, as I don't intend to use them until they've actually been assigned a value. Okay, in the next video we're going to take a more in-depth look at strings, because they are very powerful in Swift. In the meantime, please do remember to hit the subscribe button below, and in the meantime, stay safe.